Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So great to be with you this beautiful morning. So I'd like to begin with a story from Dr. Pearsall, who was a noted neuropsychologist. He and his colleagues were very curious about people who had received heart transplants and who reported changes in their personalities after receiving these donor hearts. So he and his team would interview the recipients as well as the donors of these hearts. And one of this, they're really amazing stories. And I want to read one that is, for me, one of the most striking. So the donor in this case was an 18-year-old boy who was killed in an automobile accident. And the recipient was an 18-year-old girl who had endocarditis and then went into heart failure. So the donor's father, who was a psychiatrist, said, "My son always wrote poetry. We had waited more than a year to clean out his room after he died. We found a book of poems he had never shown us, and we've never told anyone about them. One of them has left us shaken emotionally and spiritually. It spoke of his seeing his own sudden death. He was a musician too, and we found a song titled, 'Danny, my heart is yours.' The words about how my son felt he was destined to die and give his heart to someone. He had decided to donate his organs when he was just 12 years old." Now the recipient, this 18-year-old girl who received the heart, she said, quote, "When they showed me pictures of their son, I knew him directly. I would have picked him out anywhere. He's in me. I know he is in me, and he is in love with me. He was always my lover, maybe in another time somewhere. How could he know years before he died that he would die and give his heart to me? How would he know my name is Danny? And then when they played me some of his music, I could finish the phrases of his song. I could never play before, but after my transplant, I began to love music. I felt it in my heart. My heart had to play it. I told my mom I wanted to take guitar lessons, the same instrument Paul, the donor, had played. His song is in me. I feel it a lot at night, and it's like Paul is serenading me." The recipient's father reported, "My daughter, she was what you would say, she was a hellraiser. Until she got sick, she was the wild one. Then she became quite silent. I thought it was her illness, but she said she felt more energy, not less. She said she wanted to play an instrument, and she wanted to sing. When she wrote her first song, she sang about her new heart as her lover's heart. She said her lover had come to save her life." Now, like many children growing up with deeply wounded parents, I grew up wanting to be a healer. And by the time I entered college, I figured that the way to do that was to become a medical doctor. But when I got to college, my curiosity about the world and philosophy and religion, they kept steering me away from the required pre-med courses that I should have taken in order to go to med school. So when I graduated, I was a bit of a loss as to what to do. But I was very fortunate I got a fellowship to study sociology. So I did that. And I ended up having a rather short career in sociology and Native American studies because I learned about this opportunity to become a nurse practitioner, even though I wasn't a nurse through Yale. Kind of complicated story. But anyway, I was able to finally satisfy that yearning to do healthcare. So I became a nurse practitioner. And when I sat with patients using my family nurse practitioner mindset, my task was to identify health problems and diagnose disease with no expectation of perceiving the connections between the different diseases or what was going on in the life and the mind of the patient and what was going on in their body. And for most of my career as a nurse practitioner, I worked in a clinic that served migrant farm workers in Walla Walla. And so many of these patients were laborers who were working with pretty brutal conditions. They were picking asparagus, they were canning vegetables, or they were literally tearing cows apart at a beef processing facility. So along with symptoms of pesticide poisoning, I saw manifestations of autoimmune disease, chronic pain, depression, and anxiety. And all of my hard-earned expertise in testing for the biological basis of their illnesses and whatever skill I had in pharmacologic prescribing seemed really to do very little to address the core reality of my patient's experience. The diagnostic skills I'd learned didn't seem to get to the heart of the problem. So what is at the heart of people's problems? In Christian mysticism and post-Holocaust Jewish reflection, the human heart is God's open wound. And although I never received much in the way of Jewish religious instruction as the child of Jews, I'd somehow absorbed the idea of individual responsibility to be part of Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. So, disillusioned with the hard-won tools of modern medicine, I went on a search. I read books about Chinese medicine. I went to conferences on mind-body health. I studied hypnosis, thought field therapy, therapeutic touch. But when my then 2-year-old son got very sick with an ear infection, I did what I'd been taught to do, and I gave him antibiotics. And 2 courses of antibiotics later, he just seemed sicker. So I faced a dilemma, conflict. The standard protocols would have led my son to tympanostomy tubes, those tubes that drain the middle ear of pus. But I've been reading some research which showed that some of the children that had those tubes ended up having some scarring on their eardrums that could lead to some hearing loss later on in life. So, and then a friend recommended that I take him to a homeopath. And in my mind, that was a completely unscientific system of placebo that couldn't possibly be of any utility with serious illness. I was educated in the medical model, situated itself squarely within a physicalist, that is a materialist paradigm. And in this paradigm, disease can be understood purely through the lens of chemistry, Newtonian physics, and biogenetics. Simply put, we view ourselves as carbon-based machines vulnerable to breaking down from traumatic, infectious, or carcinogenic agents from the outside, or genetic, metabolic, or psychological breakdown on the inside. So this dualism has long been a fixture in the way we have conceived of health. Healthcare providers are called upon to determine whether their patients are, quote, organic, unquote, physiologically based, or psychological. The truth, however, is that the mind and the body reflect the same disease patterns, but use different languages to express those disturbances. Sometimes the disease is expressed almost entirely through physical pathology. Most of the time, the disturbance expresses itself on multiple planes: the body, the emotions, the mind, and the spirit. And much of the time, illness that conventional medicine can only manage with suppressive pharmaceuticals can be cured homeopathically with a carefully chosen vibrational remedy that resonates with the heart-mind, or to use the more theological Greek term that I love, the nous of the patient, the heart-mind of the patient. I learned this the hard way by seeing my son suffer and then miraculously recover after a few doses of homeopathic belladonna, the informational field linked to the plant we know as deadly nightshade. And that mind-bending experience eventually led me to the Hahnemann College of Homeopathic Medicine, where I began to learn an entirely different way of perceiving health and disease. and how to nurture the heart and the soul's ability to release trauma, heal disease, and achieve higher states of wellness. But here's where the conflict arose. I had not yet completed my homeopathic training, and I was working as a nurse practitioner at Reed College's Student Health Center to support my family. And one day, a student I had diagnosed with mononucleosis returned to the clinic to see if there was anything else I could do to speed her recovery. And knowing that there was nothing conventional medicine really could offer to speed that process, I asked her gently if she'd like to consider taking a homeopathic remedy. She said she would think about it and left. Well, the next day, I was requested to see my supervisor, the dean of students at Reed College. She told me that she had received a phone call from the patient's mother, who happened to be a faculty member at Harvard's medical school.
Oh, jeez.
And did she get an earful that she had a nurse practitioner in her student health center that was recommending this complete nonsense, this quackery to her daughter. And she said, you know, she wanted me to fire you, but if you just promise never to do that again, you can keep working here. Well, there were about 6 weeks, as I recall, this was a long time ago, but I think there were about 6 weeks left in the semester. And I buckled down and made it through the rest of the semester without crossing any boundaries there. But you know, every night I came home with a headache. And it was no mystery why I was having these headaches. So I knew I was repressing all my yearning to treat patients with what I believed was a safer and deeper form of medicine in order to comply with the expectations of my boss and of the institutional setting. And I knew that I couldn't sign on for another year's contract, in spite of some pressure from my wife to continue to earn a reliable income. I quit both of the nurse practitioner jobs I had at the time and opened up my own office. And that meant that for several years we had a poverty-level income. My wife pressured me to take another conventional nurse practitioner job, which turned out to be a disaster. I was actually fired from that job, and it was no mystery why too. I didn't have my heart in it. My heart wasn't in it. And it was kind of a humiliating experience for me. So I knew I had to follow my calling. And eventually my practice filled up, and a waiting list of prospective patients grew. So it all worked out. I had known in myself that I had to follow my heart. And now each day at work, I have the amazing opportunity to witness how something non-material can touch the soul of my patients. And I'm so grateful to have this window into the usually invisible but powerful connections between people and the elements, the plants, and the animals of our world. I'd like to just conclude with another tale from Jewish, Hasidic, and Kabbalistic traditions. It's the Lamed Vav Tzadikim story, which states that there exist at any given time in the world 36 hidden righteous people who are called tzadikim, whose selfless virtue upholds the world. And this belief draws from the Talmud, where it said, quote, the world never lacks 36 righteous people who greet the Shekinah, the divine presence, every day. The 36 are said to be so humble that they themselves do not know that they are among the 36. Their merit is so great, yet their humility is greater still. These tzadikim hold up the moral balance of the world. Without them, it is said, the world would be destroyed. They act with deep compassion, righteousness, and humility, often in obscurity. They represent the idea that goodness is preserved through anonymity, modesty, and the daily practice of mercy and justice. They are often depicted as ordinary people doing quiet acts of kindness, not necessarily religious leaders or scholars or doctors or nurse practitioners, I would add. They're beggars, janitors, teachers, children. Anyone could be one of the 36. But I wonder, though, whether we limit our perspective too much when we assume that the tzaddikim are all human. Remedies, acting as archetypal keys to fields of consciousness of all of God's creations, work to restore balance without payment, credit, or appreciation. I bow down in thanks and gratitude to God for reminding us how deeply our souls are connected to the spirits of the elements, the earth, the plants, and the animals of our beloved earth. Thank you.
Some of the converted Pharisees got up and demanded that such Gentiles be forced to convert to Judaism first, before being baptized, and be told to follow the law of Moses. Accordingly, the apostles and the elders convened to look into the matter. After much discussion, Peter said to them, "Friends, you know that God chose me from your midst a long time ago, so that the Gentiles would hear the message of the gospel from my lips and believe. God, who can read everyone's heart, bore witness to this by granting the Holy Spirit to them, as the Spirit has been granted to us. God made no distinction, but purified their hearts as well by means of faith. Why then do you put God to the test by trying to place on the shoulders of these converts a yoke which neither we nor our ancestors were able to bear? But just as we believe we are saved through the grace of Jesus Christ, so are they." At this, the whole assembly fell silent. Holy wisdom, holy word.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated.
A few years ago, my friend Jennifer, who recently retired from a long career as a teacher, taught me the phrase, zone of productive disequilibrium. Because of course she did. Because of course that's how learning works. We know that. And many of us, maybe most of us, can find ourselves fighting against being in that space. That uncomfortable, agitational space of stretch between the familiar and accepted and the new and yet to be integrated. There's an irony to me that it was Jennifer who identified this so well, named it in such a way that it has stuck with me over the years. I say this because Jennifer readily, publicly identifies herself as conflict avoidant. And don't worry, I checked with Jennifer, the conflict avoidant one, before bringing her into this story. I have known Jennifer for at least 25 years, across now 3 congregations, through the raising of her and John's 2 children, and through the birth and growing of my kids. I now get to love watching her bring her first grandchild here most Sundays. We have gotten to see each other grow and change. We have certainly watched the world around us experience ever more rapid reiteration. And together we have navigated the seismic shifts in what it means to be church in this time and place for over 2 decades. She may see herself as conflict avoidant, but I see her as a lifelong learner, operating in that zone of productive disequilibrium, meeting new people, trying new things, growing and changing, and allowing the Spirit to stir up new life in and through her. What does this have to do with conflict? How do we reconcile in ourselves our tendencies to be conflict avoidant and our desire to step into the transformation God invites us to daily? Not all conflict creates healthy change, but I am wondering if all healthy change requires the ability to navigate conflict. At its most toxic, conflict involves us versus them. My power, my desire, my needs, pitted against yours. Someone here will win and someone here will lose. That is the conflict many of us feel compelled to avoid. Clashes of dominance and harm. Clashes of tearing someone down to build someone up. Clashes that attack the idea of mutual humanity, mutual God-belovedness, mutual care. But that is not the only version of conflict. Me versus you, us versus them. And often we default to viewing all conflict through that lens. So we run from that feeling, that push and discomfort that moves us into the zone of productive disequilibrium. Conflict is tension, a place of energy. And if we let it, it can be a generative space of growth. I do not believe that blessed are the peacemakers is the same as blessed are those who avoid conflict at all costs. We may be tempted to believe that as Jesus followers, it is our job to hold all things in harmony. But let's check that. Let's hold that up to the story of Jesus and see if it is truly what it means to follow, to emulate, to be, as Martin Luther taught, little Christs in the world. In today's language, Jesus was certainly a disruptor. So disruptive that the status quo, the powers that be, the empire, not only killed him, but did it publicly as a way to strike fear into the hearts of those who would seek to follow him. And empire today is not really different than empire 2,000 years ago. The tactics and goals remain the same, even if the message is live streamed directly into the devices we carry in our pockets. So, avoidance is not the Jesus model. The peace proclaimed by the one we call Prince of Peace is not a false harmony of hegemony. Instead, it is the peace that comes only through justice, through right relationship, through models of reconciliation, not dominance. More irony. It was during the time of Pax Romana, the Roman peace, beginning in 27 BCE and lasting until 180 CE, that Jesus was killed. Was killed for being a threat to the false peace by calling for justice in a system that sought peace through control. Even in that time, those with power created the narrative at the cost of the lived experience of those on the bottom of the social structure. Pax Romana was no time of peace for those under occupation. Please remember this when someone challenges your work for justice by saying religion and politics don't mix. What else is politics other than how we structure living out our values? So what are some hallmarks of conflict when we focus on utilizing the potential energy it contains? Because that's what that tension is. Tension is potential energy. Nothing acts or moves or changes without that tension. Tension is the life's blood, the living place of the Holy Spirit. And when we fear and run from it, I say we circumvent the invitation of God. What does conflict look like when we let it move in us and move us to the zone of productive disequilibrium? What can we take away from Jesus' life and the scriptures about how to engage in generative, life-giving conflict that centers on growth for all instead of control or winning by some? Our ancient sacred text today comes to us from the book of Acts, also known as the Acts of the Apostles. Acts is the story of the founding of the Christian church and the spreading of its message across the Roman Empire. It is what happened after the one the empire thought it had buried showed himself to be a seed, springing forth with even greater power. What was the story contained in one man, Jesus, after the ascension became the story of people filled with the Holy Spirit, taking the gospel into new places and inviting people into new life. And of course, conflict arose. Our modern text for today says we can expect conflict, to arise whenever people come together to try to do anything at all, as our needs and interests will and do brush up against one another's. Conflict is not only natural to us, it's needed for change. For the people in the Acts story, change was indeed coming. And one thing they needed to imagine was how to navigate new life together with people they had previously been separated from. Would the Jewish followers of Jesus require the newly engaged Gentiles to convert to Judaism before they could be baptized? What practices would be required, and who would decide? With each new person and community that encountered the gospel, the good news, what would be the determiner of how faith would be practiced? To what extent would uniformity be required for unity? Spoiler alert, these same questions are part of our faith lives today. We find them even here in this room. How will we navigate our lives together as we each bring variations of practice and tradition to the mosaic of our shared journey? Can we find unity, enough connectivity, love, and goodwill to accompany one another in our faith journey without allowing conflicts, tension in the face of difference, to lead to a demand for uniformity? Can I love you and let you be you? Can you love me and let me be me? And together we support the flourishing of each of us in our seeking to live out where the Spirit calls us. Can we embrace that tension with its potential for growth and revelation? Take it from a farmer's daughter. Compacted soil is lousy for growing things. It must be stirred and agitated to mix in new nutrients, to allow the water to flow, to give room for roots to sink deep. In what way is our coming together breaking apart the areas of our faith that have become root-bound in dried-out soil? Can we bend without breaking? Can we listen without defending? Can we honor one another in ways that strengthen our relationships and serve as witness to generative conflict in a way that can feel like, in a world that can feel like winner takes all? This is a witness we have to offer. This is an opportunity we have to model in a world that is ever more divided. May it be so. Amen. So one of the practices here at Salt and Light is after the word is shared, we invite one another into conversation. So now, for the next 7 minutes, I'm going to invite you to turn to a partner, one-on-one, and have a conversation. If this is not something that you are desiring today, if it's just not where you want to be, you are welcome to sit quietly and meditate. You are welcome to head out to the sunroom and get a cup of coffee or tea, however you would like to be in the room. For those open to conversation, I would like to lift up that question that says, in what way is our coming together breaking apart areas of our faith that have become root-bound? So where are you feeling challenged as we share faith lives together, as people who haven't shared a long history? For about a year, Central and Salt and Light have been journeying together. We come from very different practices, but we are finding joy and love and encouragement and curiosity in our spaces together. Where are you feeling stirred up? That's right. Yay! What's breaking up and open for you? Keeping in mind that that may not feel wonderful. Your story may be one of, I'm challenged, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm here, and I'm curious, and I'm rooted in love. So that's my invitation. You have about 7 minutes, and then we'll do a feedback.